Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, January 24th, 2024. All right, so the first story at the top of antiwar.com today, the U.S. bombs Iraq yet again. So the U.S. launched another round of airstrikes in Iraq on Tuesday as tensions continue to soar in the region. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said in a statement that the strikes targeted 3 facilities used by Kata'ib Hezbollah and other what they called Iranian-affiliated groups, and that's referring to Iraq's Shia militias. Kata'ib Hezbollah is one of the main militias in Iraq. And a correspondent for Al-Mayadeen said that the strikes targeted positions of the Popular Mobilization Forces in several areas. And the Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF, they're a coalition of Iraqi militias that was formed in 2014 to fight ISIS. They're part of Iraq's security forces. And this is part of the reason why al-Sudani, the prime minister, has been getting so angry about these U.S. airstrikes, is that they've been targeting the PMF, which again is part of Iraq's security forces. So the Al-Mayadeen report said that there were strikes on Jurf al-Nasr, which is a town south of Baghdad, that killed at least 2 people. And that was just one area where these strikes were launched. It was several areas around Baghdad. So we don't have a clear count of casualties yet. So Austin said that the strikes were in retaliation for the attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria that started in mid-October in response to President Biden's support for the Israeli slaughter in Gaza. And in this statement, Austin claimed that the U.S. does not seek to escalate the conflict in the region, which is just an absurd thing for the U.S. to say. They've been bombing Iraq, Syria, Yemen. I mean, to say that they're not looking for escalation, just completely ridiculous. And these strikes have done nothing. They say that they're doing them to deter more attacks, but these groups aren't backing down. I saw there was more attacks in Syria pretty shortly after this. So the Iraqi government of Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani, who is the U.S.'s supposed partner in Iraq, that's what they say. It is, they're there to help the government fight ISIS. But the Iraqi government has been furious with the U.S. over the airstrikes. And al-Sudani has been calling for the U.S.-led coalition in Iraq to leave. But there's no sign that the Biden administration is preparing for a withdrawal. If you remember that story that I covered yesterday, so far there's been over 140 attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. About 70 have been injured. And according to the New York Times, President Biden and his top advisors, which means Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, they all believe it's just a matter of time before an American soldier dies. So they're just leaving them there as a tripwire for war with Iran. That report said they'll probably attack Iran directly, even though there's no evidence that Iran is directing these attacks, and Iran has denied that they're involved. Okay, so the next one here. Former al-Qaeda members are part of the U.S.-backed Yemeni forces. So there was an investigation from BBC that was published on Tuesday, and there's actually a documentary with it as well. And it focuses on political assassinations that have taken place in Yemen for years now. And it reveals that basically that they're backed by, they're being carried out by the UAE through proxies. It's an interesting report. Initially, they hired American mercenaries who were members of a group called Spear Operations Group, and they were very forthright with what they did, saying that, yes, we were involved in these assassinations, and most of the assassinations targeted the Muslim Brotherhood's affiliated political party in Yemen. They're mostly based in southern Yemen, in Aden and areas around there. And, a lot of the people that were killed were just politicians. But anyway, so these American mercenaries started doing these assassinations. They say they stopped in 2016, but trained UAE forces who were based in Yemen to carry them out. And then they went on to train Yemenis. So pretty interesting. And again, this is part of the U.S.-backed coalition. The UAE joined the Saudis in the invasion of Yemen to oust the Houthis in 2015. So that is a very interesting aspect of this investigation. But what I thought was more important, considering everything that's happening in Yemen, was the details about al-Qaeda being part of the U.S.-backed forces in Yemen. So this investigation revealed that the UAE recruited al-Qaeda members who now work for the Southern Transitional Council, the STC, which is a Yemeni Southern separatist group that is part of the U.S. and Saudi-backed Yemeni government. The UAE joined Saudi Arabia, I just mentioned that, in the war against the Houthis. And the U.S., of course, threw its weight behind this coalition. And we've known for years now that this coalition, specifically the UAE and its backed forces in South Yemen, recruited al-Qaeda fighters to fight the Houthis. So the new BBC investigation cited a document obtained by a whistleblower that revealed 11 former members of al-Qaeda now work in the STC, which and their whole thing is that they want to basically create the country of South Yemen again, restore the borders before Yemen unified as one country in 1990. And Yemeni sources told BBC that a former senior al-Qaeda official who is a suspect in the 2000 bombing of the USS Cole, the bombing of the U.S. warship, the USS Cole, off Yemen. They're saying this guy's a suspect in that. His name's Nasser al-Shiba, and he is a commander in an STC military unit. And the STC is part of the Yemeni Presidential Leadership Council. That's the PLC. I hope I don't lose you with these abbreviations. But the PLC was formed in 2022 when the Saudis reached a ceasefire with the Houthis and gave up on reinstating former President Abdu Rabu Mansour Hadi. So Hadi was the president that the Saudis were trying to reinstall. He was, he's based in Saudi Arabia. He has been since 2015. And they basically gave up on that goal. So they formed this presidential council with other elements in Yemen, including the STC. So these are all kind of Houthi or Ansar Allah, as they are officially known. So the STC's leader, so this Southern Separatist group's leader, his name is Idris al-Zubaydi. He's the vice president of the PLC, of this presidential council, and that's what the U.S. views as the legitimate government of Yemen. So this guy has al-Qaeda guys running parts of his military. And after President Biden began striking the Houthis in Yemen over their attacks on Israel-linked commercial shipping, al-Zubaydi, the leader of the STC and vice president of the PLC, he called for U.S. support for a ground campaign against Ansar Allah, which is the Houthis. He said, quote, "Ground forces must be supported on the ground, and these forces belong to the legitimate government. These forces are the ones who can achieve a victory on the ground because strong strikes without ground operations are useless," end quote. So you have this guy, he wants a ground operation against the Houthis that's supported by the U.S. and the U.K., I believe he also said. And right now, there's no indication that the U.S. is looking to back a ground campaign like that, but the situation continues to escalate. The U.S. keeps bombing Yemen. They've done it 8 times now since January 12th, and U.S. officials say they're planning for an open-ended war. Another thing, I posted something on Twitter about this when al-Zubaydi first said this last week, and a few people I know who know much more about Yemen than me said that right now, Yemen is united against the U.S., against Israel, that they don't expect even the anti-Houthi elements to get on board with a new ground war against the Houthis. But that is what he's saying he wants. And then another big detail here is that the Houthis were previously a partner of the U.S. in the fight against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Back in January 2015, there was a Wall Street Journal report that said the U.S. had forged ties with the Houthis as part of a strategy to maintain its fight against a key branch of al-Qaeda. And then just a few months later, in March 2015, the Obama administration announced that it was backing the Saudi-led coalition against the Houthis. So this war, the U.S. backing that coalition, puts them on the side of al-Qaeda. And if they back a new ground invasion against the Houthis, that's Al-Qaeda guys are going to be fighting against them on behalf of the U.S. So I thought this was kind of an important story to get out there. Maybe it could wake some people up about kind of what the U.S. is involved in Yemen. And again, I linked to the documentary. That's pretty interesting. The assassination story is interesting here, and these American mercenaries who were involved in it are very forthright about it. And the way that they would carry out these assassinations, they would detonate a bomb that would explode and then basically shoot the target as they're running away. The bomb would be a distraction. And these types of assassinations have continued for years. There's been over 100 between 2015 and 2018, and there was recently one that happened just a month ago in Yemen. All right, so the next story here, the U.S. launches airstrikes in Somalia. That's right, Somalia. So this was these airstrikes were launched on January 21st. They were announced by U.S. Africa Command on Tuesday, and this marks the first known U.S. bombing of Somalia in 2024. So AFRICOM said in a press release that the strikes consisted of 2 separate engagements against Al-Shabaab about 20 miles northeast of Kismayo, which is a port in southern Somalia. The command said the strikes were launched at the request of the U.S.-backed Mogadishu-based government. The command said that its initial assessment found 3 al-Shabaab fighters were killed and claimed that no civilians were harmed. But we always got to point out that AFRICOM specifically is notorious for undercounting civilian casualties, for hiding civilian casualties, and U.S. military operations in Somalia are shrouded in secrecy. So the last U.S. airstrikes in Somalia that were reported on AFRICOM took place on December 20th. There was 2 in December, and it was a few months before that they launched strikes in Somalia. And the reason why I say this is the first known U.S. bombing of this year is because the CIA could be conducting drone strikes in Somalia that we don't know about, or JSOC, more secretive military operations. But this is what we know, and it just goes to show, no matter what's going on, this war in Yemen, this war in Somalia just continues. I mean, this has been going on for, since George W. Bush at some level. And the U.S. airstrikes in Somalia, they escalated back in 2022 when President Biden sent 500 troops to Somalia, and the U.S.-backed government launched an offensive against al-Shabaab. And so when the House was debating a resolution to withdraw from Somalia, this was in 2023, the lawmakers said during that debate that there was 900 U.S. troops there, so Biden could have sent more without announcing it. And basically the U.S. ground troops in Somalia train the Danab Brigade, which is like kind of their special forces there. Most of the U.S. involvement in the actual fighting is drone strikes. And so this is continuing. During the Trump administration was actually the heaviest the U.S. ever bombed Somalia. He was bombing Somalia more in 1 year than Bush and Obama combined. So Biden didn't get back to those levels yet, but it's still something that is just always going on. And they're fighting al-Shabaab there, which is an al-Qaeda affiliate. But the important context here is that they did not declare loyalty to al-Qaeda until 2012, and that was years after they fought the U.S. and their proxy forces. In 2006, I linked to an article from Scott Horton. It's actually a chapter from his book, Enough Already, and it's his chapter on Somalia. So the U.S. backed an Ethiopian invasion of Somalia in 2006 that ousted the Islamic Courts Union, which was a coalition of Muslim groups that had power in Mogadishu pretty briefly for not very long. And then al-Shabaab was kind of the radical offshoot of that. Their first recorded attack was in 2007 in Mogadishu against occupying Ethiopian soldiers. Okay, so the next one here, Hezbollah targets command center in Israel. This article is from Jason Ditz. So for the second time this month, Hezbollah reports targeting an Israeli air command center in northern Israel with rockets. The base on top of Mount Meron was heavily used for aerial command before it was badly damaged earlier this month in a Hezbollah retaliation to an assassination. This time, Hezbollah is reporting the strikes were in response to further assassinations, as well as Israeli attacks on civilians in southern Lebanon and Syria. Hezbollah's comments on Syria likely refer to a Damascus attack that killed 5 Iranian advisors in a residential building that was destroyed. They also killed some other, I believe, Syrian civilians. So the assassinations have occurred intermittently in Lebanon, with senior officials targeted as opportunity presents itself. The most recent such attack killed a Hezbollah operative, yet reportedly the main target of the drone strike was able to survive. The latest string of tit-for-tat strikes began with the assassination of Salah Aruri, a Hamas figure who was responsible for hostage exchanges, who was killed in Beirut by an Israeli drone strike. Very, very provocative, very, very big escalation. So this continues, and Jason says this is, a southern Lebanon has turned into, and northern Israel, it's a war zone there. They're not officially calling it a war, but there's heavy fire being exchanged across the border almost every day. So this could always really get big. Hezbollah has yet to really use their long range, stuff, and their more powerful missiles, and Israel hasn't sent any, as far as we know. There was reports of them sending some special forces soldiers across the border, but they haven't invaded southern Lebanon yet. It seems like this is something Israel's really trying to provoke. All right, so the next one here, 21 Israeli soldiers killed after Hamas rocket triggered a mine blast. So 21 Israeli soldiers were killed on Monday when they came under attack by Hamas in the Gaza Strip near the Israeli border. The soldiers came under attack while they were planting mines to demolish 2 buildings in central Gaza, and a Hamas RPG hit a nearby tank, which likely triggered the mines and collapsed the building on the troops, according to the Israeli Defense Forces. So they were lining these buildings with two buildings with explosives to demolish them. And while that was happening, Hamas rocket hit nearby and blew them up. So in a separate incident, 3 other Israeli soldiers were killed, making it the deadliest day for the IDF since the ground invasion of Gaza was launched in October. The IDF has said that the death toll in the ground operation has risen to 219. A recent report from the Israeli news site Walla said 4,000 Israeli troops have been classified as disabled. So far, the Israeli slaughter in Gaza has killed over 25,000 Palestinians, including over 9,600 children and 6,750 women, and another 8,000 people are missing and presumed to be dead or dying under the rubble. And so we've seen a lot of videos surfacing online of Israeli forces doing these controlled demolitions of buildings, and that means they go in there and they pack them with explosives and blow them up. So the whole idea that, it shows that there's no threats in that building, that they're just destroying buildings to destroy Gaza. There was a video of a university in Gaza, the Al-Isra University, being blown up by Israel in one of these demolitions. And again, how can they justify this and say, oh, there's Hamas, infrastructure there? Well, if you're able to go in and line it with explosives, then obviously there's no threat. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces encircle Khan Younis, shooting anyone who moves. So this article is from Middle East Eye. With Israeli snipers and tanks positioned to fire on any signs of life, Palestinians across Khan Younis are now under siege with nowhere to go. So this is Wujdan, a Palestinian who was in the city, said, quote, "The situation in Khan Younis is catastrophic. Tanks are less than 500 meters from Al-Amal neighborhood, and snipers have taken over the roofs of the higher residential buildings there, ready to shoot anyone who moves," end quote. He described waking up to wounds as the windows in his temporary residence shattered over him from intense overnight Israeli attacks. Ambulances have been unable to reach the wounded across Khan Younis after the headquarters of the Palestinian Red Crescent was surrounded by Israel's military. Israeli drones shot at anyone moving near Al-Amal Hospital, the PCRS said on Tuesday. So they're attacking hospitals. They have the whole city surrounded. And just sounds like a really horrific situation for the people who are stuck. And for several days now, the Israeli tanks have been closing in on Nasser Hospital, which is the largest functioning medical facility in Gaza, but it does not seem like it will be functional for much longer. All right, so the next one here, Israel is killing civilians on an unprecedented scale. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres issued sharp words for Israel's mass slaughter of civilians in Gaza. He said, quote, "In Gaza, Israel's military operations have spread massive destruction and killed civilians on a scale unprecedented during my time as Secretary General, including more than 150 members of our own staff. This is heartbreaking and utterly unacceptable," end quote. So I think that's pretty clear that this is an unprecedented slaughter of civilians, in recent times at least. And I know Guterres himself has said that it's worse than the killing fields in Cambodia, which is a pretty shocking thing to hear him say. That's when he first started working for the UN. All right, so the next one here, Senator Coons says that Netanyahu weakens the Palestinian Authority and accepts Hamas. So Democratic Senator Chris Coons, this is another article from Kyle at the Libertarian Institute. Chris Coons explained on CNN that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has long worked against a Palestinian state by weakening the Palestinian Authority and accepting Hamas. During Netanyahu's decades-long rule in Israel, Tel Aviv has used the division between Hamas and the PA to argue Israel has no partner to negotiate. This is something Scott Horton's been writing a lot about and doing a lot of shows about, so I said jokingly on Twitter that maybe Chris Coons has been listening to Scott Horton. So it is interesting to say, and that's the wording that he used. I'll just read his quote. Coons said on CNN's State of the Union, quote, "Netanyahu has a record of dividing the PA in the West Bank and weakening it and accepting the leadership of Hamas," end quote. And this is something that's talked about a lot in Israeli media. There's been pieces in the Times of Israel and Haaretz and other big Israeli papers talking about this. And this is part of the reason why there's this political reckoning for Netanyahu happening that he's trying to delay by continuing the fighting, the slaughter, I should say, and trying to provoke a even bigger war in the region. All right, so the next one here, Ukraine is running out of 155 millimeter artillery shells. Another one from Kyle. He was busy today. It says that Ukraine has nearly depleted its stockpile of 155 millimeter artillery shells for its American-made howitzers. The shortage is problematic for Ukrainian troops who are outfired 10-1 by Russian forces. A Ukrainian soldier speaking to CNN said, quote, "The ratio of artillery fire is about 10-1. Russia is a country that produces ammo and they have strategic reserves. Yes, they use old Soviet systems, but Soviet systems can still kill," end quote. So the U.S. has shipped Ukraine over 2 million of these 155 millimeter artillery shells, and they're trying to increase their increase their production of these. And that was the excuse that the Biden administration used to send the cluster bombs was, we're running out of all these other artillery shells, but we have all these great cluster bomb artillery shells lying around, so let's send them over too. Who cares about the civilians it's going to kill? That's their way of thinking. So these shortages, especially now that the U.S. still hasn't passed its new spending package for Ukraine, the EU is struggling to pass its aid bills and stuff. So just another sign of how bleak things are looking for the Ukrainians fighting on the front lines. 10-1. That they're outfiring them 10-1. That's a huge ratio. All right, so the next one here, the UK agrees to come to Ukraine's future defense. So this article is from Declassified UK, and I'm happy they wrote this because I saw that the UK signed some new deal with Ukraine, and I didn't really understand what it was. So this is just a little summary of it. A new agreement signed by Rishi Sunak and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on January 12th provides UK security commitments to Ukraine in the event of new aggression by Moscow. It states, quote, "In the event of future Russian armed attack against Ukraine at the request of either of the participants will consult within 24 hours to determine measures needed to counter or deter the aggression," end quote. It then says that the UK undertakes to provide Ukraine with, quote, "swift and sustained security assistance, modern military equipment across all domains as necessary," end quote. So it's not explicitly saying that the UK should, intervene directly, but they're trying to make the language similar to NATO. It also encourages Ukraine to provide military assistance to Britain in the event of an attack on the UK. So that's really the NATO Article 5. That's what makes it kind of seem like that, is that they're saying, oh yeah, both countries should help each other if they come under attack. So it does not make this so it says that commitment is not formal for Ukraine. So it's kind of confusing. But Zelensky used the words security guarantees or guarantees when describing the agreement at a press conference in Kiev following its signing. Sunak has tended to use the phrase security assurances. The text does not refer to guarantees, but to security commitments. So kind of vague. And it says some commentators say that such commitments are toothless and do not provide a hard defense guarantee. They compare them to the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, when Ukraine agreed to give up its Soviet nuclear arsenal in exchange for security assurances that it just, again, didn't really mean anything. So this is just the UK doing something to say that they're doing something, and similar with Ukraine, signing this deal. All right, so the last one here, Turkey approves Sweden's NATO membership. So finally, the Turkish parliament has ratified Sweden's NATO bid, and this brings Stockholm one step closer to joining the military alliance. Turkey's General Assembly voted 287 to 55 to approve Sweden's NATO bid about a year and a half after Stockholm submitted its application. Hungary is the final NATO country that needs to approve Sweden's membership. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban said on Tuesday that he invited Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson for a visit to Hungary to negotiate on Sweden's NATO accession. And Stockholm appeared to decline the invitation. Sweden's foreign minister basically said, we don't need to negotiate anything. We just want Hungary to ratify our membership. And I know when it comes to Hungary, they've been saying, they haven't been happy with there's been some criticism of the Orban government from Sweden's government. So they've been holding out on ratifying the NATO membership. And Sweden applied to join NATO with Finland back in May 2022. Turkey delayed its approval over their alleged support for the PKK and other Kurdish militant groups. And Turkey ended up approving Finland's membership first back in March 2023, but held out longer with Sweden. They had more issues with Sweden. They want extradition of suspected, PKK members. They had them. Sweden made like a new anti-terrorism law for Turkey so they can get into NATO. And once Sweden officially joins NATO, the alliance will have 32 members, which is twice what it had at the end of the Cold War. And Finland joining NATO has significantly raised tensions with Russia since the Russian-Finnish border is over 800 miles long. So that's a huge NATO territory has really expanded on the Russian border. And the U.S. recently signed a deal with Finland that gives it access to 15 bases in the country, including one that's on the border. That's called like a border security guard base. I mean, it's crazy. And then the U.S. also signed a similar agreement that will allow it to establish a military presence in Sweden. So the U.S. is expanding into all these new countries that are joining NATO. So that's it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from Ted Snyder. Who are the Houthis and why are we hearing from them now? One from Dan McKnight. Biden lied. Now people will die. One from Haaretz, the editorial board of Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper. Israel must investigate how these 3 Israelis died in Hamas tunnels in Gaza. So this is interesting. I don't think I covered this. I meant to, but 3 Israeli hostages died in the tunnels. And one of the hostages' mothers said she got some sort of toxicology report that showed he died of poison gas, and she said the Israeli government gassed the tunnels and killed them. So Haaretz is calling for an investigation. One from Daniel R. DePetris, U.S. bombings in Yemen don't solve the Houthi problem. And one from Jack Merkinson, U.S. media ignoring Israel's campaign to kill Palestinian journalists. So please go check all that out. You could always support this show by sharing it, liking, subscribing, commenting, telling your friends about antiwar.com. what's today? I got 2 more shows this week, so I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.